The crystal chandelier sparkled above Eleanor Price as she polished the marble floors of the Ashford estate, her reflection distorted in the gleaming stone. For 3 years, she'd cleaned these halls, invisible to the family that lived here. Just another pair of hands maintaining their pristine world. Eleanor, Constance Ashford's voice echoed from the grand staircase. When you're finished there, the ballroom needs attention. We're hosting the Spring Charity Gala this Saturday. Yes, Mrs. Ashford, Eleanor replied, keeping her eyes down as she'd learned to do. Constance descended the stairs with her daughter, Melissa, both draped in designer clothes that cost more than Eleanor made in 6 months. They discussed the guest list, the menu, the orchestra, a world Eleanor knew intimately but from which she was forever excluded. Or so they thought. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in Eleanor's cleaning supplies cart. Thick, cream-colored paper with gold embossing. Her name written in elegant calligraphy. Miss Eleanor Price. She opened it carefully, her calloused hands incongruous against the expensive stationery. You are cordially invited to the Ashford Spring Charity Gala. Formal attire required. Your presence would be enlightening. The signature was Constance Ashford's, but the tone dripped with mockery. Eleanor had overheard the conversation 2 days ago. Constance and her socialite friends laughing about the social experiment of inviting the help to see how uncomfortable they'd be. It'll be absolutely hilarious, Melissa had giggled. Can you imagine Eleanor trying to make conversation with the governor? She probably doesn't even know which fork to use. Eleanor stood in the empty hallway, invitation in hand, facing a choice. She could ignore it, spare herself the intended humiliation. Or she could do something that would change everything. She chose the latter. That evening, in her modest apartment above a bookstore in the Arts District, Eleanor opened her closet. Behind her everyday clothes hung a garment bag she hadn't touched in years. Inside was a gown, midnight blue silk, that shimmered like water, custom-made by a designer who'd once been her dear friend. From another box, she retrieved shoes, jewelry, and a clutch purse, remnants of a life she'd left behind, but never quite abandoned. Eleanor sat at her small desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the practiced ease of someone who'd once conducted research at the highest levels. Within hours, she'd gathered everything she needed. The Ashford family didn't know who Eleanor Price really was. They saw a cleaning lady, competent but unremarkable. They didn't see Dr. Eleanor Price, former professor of economics at Columbia University, published author of 3 groundbreaking books on wealth inequality, and former consultant to the United Nations. They didn't know that 7 years ago, Eleanor's husband had died in a car accident, leaving her with crushing medical debt from his long illness. They didn't know she'd lost her position at Columbia when a vindictive department head fabricated plagiarism charges she couldn't afford to fight legally while managing her husband's final care and funeral expenses. They didn't know that Eleanor had chosen cleaning work deliberately, studying the wealthy up close, understanding their world from a perspective her academic research had never provided. And they certainly didn't know that she'd spent 3 years documenting everything she observed: the casual cruelty, the waste, the disconnection between the Ashfords' public charity work and their private behavior. Eleanor had no desire for revenge, but she believed in truth and in the power of education, even when the students didn't know they were being taught. Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather. Eleanor prepared meticulously. Her hair, usually tied back practically, was styled in elegant waves. Her makeup was subtle but professional. The gown fit perfectly, as if 7 years hadn't passed since she'd last worn it. She looked at herself in the mirror. This was who she'd been. Who she still was. Underneath the uniform and the calluses, Dr. Eleanor Price hadn't died. She'd just been waiting. The taxi dropped her at the Ashford Estate's main entrance, not the service entrance she used for work, but the grand front steps where guests arrived. The valet looked confused for a moment, then offered his hand to help her from the car. Eleanor walked up the marble steps she'd scrubbed countless times, now as a guest rather than an employee. Her heart beat steadily. She'd faced hostile academic conferences, United Nations assemblies, and television debates. A room full of wealthy people trying to make her uncomfortable was nothing she couldn't handle. The ballroom was magnificent. Flowers spilled from every surface. An orchestra played classical pieces. Eleanor recognized instantly she'd minored in music before choosing economics. Guests milled about in their finest attire, champagne glasses catching the light. Constance Ashford spotted her first. Her expression flickered through surprise, confusion, and then settled on malicious delight. "Eleanor, you actually came." Her voice carried across the room, drawing attention. "How brave of you." Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Eleanor felt dozens of pairs of eyes assessing her, judging her, expecting her to crumble under their scrutiny. Instead, she smiled calm, confident, completely at ease. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Ashford. What a lovely event." Melissa appeared at her mother's side, whispering loudly enough to be heard. "Mother, is that really appropriate? Having the cleaning lady here as a guest? Why wouldn't it be appropriate?" Eleanor asked pleasantly. "This is a charity gala, isn't it? I assume all are welcome to support a good cause." Constance's smile sharpened. "Of course, dear, though I'm surprised you could afford the ticket price. It's $5,000 per person." "I received an invitation," Eleanor replied. "I assumed that meant I was invited, not required to purchase entry." A few nearby guests murmured. Constance's cheeks flushed slightly. She'd been caught in her own social trap. She'd invited Eleanor specifically to humiliate her, but couldn't now claim Eleanor was gate-crashing. "Well," Constance recovered, "let me introduce you to some of our guests. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to meet you." What followed was a carefully orchestrated parade of awkward introductions. Constance led Eleanor from group to group, always introducing her as "our cleaning lady, Eleanor," with emphasis on the occupation. Each introduction was designed to emphasize the social gap, to make Eleanor feel small. "Eleanor, this is Senator Richardson. Senator, Eleanor cleans our toilets. Eleanor, meet Dr. Hampton, Chief of Surgery at Presbyterian. Eleanor scrubs our floors. This is Judge Morrison. Eleanor, the judge graduated from Harvard Law. Where did you go to school?" Each introduction came with barely concealed smirks from Constance and her circle. They were waiting for Eleanor to stumble, to reveal her discomfort, to provide the evening's entertainment, but Eleanor didn't stumble. "To Senator Richardson," she said. "Senator, I've followed your work on economic policy. Your recent bill on wage protection had some interesting provisions, though I noticed the implementation timeline might create challenges for small businesses. Have you considered a phased approach?" The senator blinked, surprised. Yes, actually, that's been a concern. How did you?" To Dr. Hampton, she discussed recent advances in surgical techniques she'd read about in medical journals. To Judge Morrison, she mentioned a recent Supreme Court decision and its implications for lower court rulings. Each conversation revealed depth of knowledge that contradicted everything these people assumed about her. Constance's smile grew more strained with each successful interaction. "This wasn't going according to plan." "Eleanor," Melissa interrupted loudly, "that's a beautiful dress." "They don't," Eleanor replied calmly. "This was custom-made for me by André Laurent in 2016. Gasps rippled through the nearby group. André Laurent was one of the most exclusive designers in the world. His custom gowns started at $50,000 and had waiting lists years long. "That's impossible," Melissa scoffed. "André Laurent doesn't make dresses for—" She caught herself, but the implication hung in the air. "For cleaning ladies?" Eleanor finished gently. "No, I suppose he doesn't. He made this for me when I was Dr. Eleanor Price, professor of economics at Columbia University. Before I cleaned your mother's house, I consulted for the United Nations on global wealth distribution." The silence that followed was profound. Constance's face had gone pale. "You're lying. If you were some fancy professor, why would you be cleaning houses?" Life, Eleanor said simply, is more complicated than the simple narratives we tell ourselves about people based on their current circumstances. She turned to address the growing crowd around her. 3 years ago, I needed work quickly. I'd exhausted my savings during my husband's final illness and subsequent funeral. I needed to pay rent, buy food, and survive while I rebuilt my life. Cleaning paid immediately. It required no explanation of my resume gap, and it gave me something I valued: time to observe, to think, to research. Research? Judge Morrison asked, genuinely curious now. What kind of research? Eleanor smiled. I've been writing a book, an ethnographic study of wealth in America, based on 3 years of participant observation in the homes of the wealthy. My publisher is releasing it next month. It's already attracted significant attention from the academic community and mainstream media. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Constance looked like she might faint. You've been studying us? Melissa's voice rose shrilly. That's unethical. That's completely legal and methodologically sound, Eleanor interrupted. I've changed all names and identifying details, of course. It's not about specific individuals. It's about patterns, behaviors, the way wealth shapes perspective and often erodes empathy. She paused, letting that sink in. For instance, there's a fascinating chapter about performative charity, the way some wealthy people engage in public philanthropy while treating service workers with casual cruelty in private. The disconnect between public persona and private behavior. Constance found her voice. This is outrageous. I've treated you perfectly well. Have you? Eleanor's tone remained pleasant, but her words were steel. Shall we discuss the time you fired the previous cleaning lady because she asked to leave early to attend her daughter's graduation? Or when you threw away a week's worth of prepared meals because you didn't like the containers they were stored in, not caring that the cook had a family to feed? Or the Christmas when you gave your staff $50 gift cards while spending $30,000 on a party for your friends? The crowd had grown larger. People were listening intently now, some recording on their phones. Those are private matters, Constance hissed. They become public when they illustrate systematic issues, Eleanor replied. I'm not here to attack you personally, Mrs. Ashford. I'm here because you invited me, thinking I'd be embarrassed. But I'm not embarrassed by honest work. I'm not ashamed of survival. And I'm certainly not intimidated by people who measure worth solely by bank account balances. A voice from the crowd called out, Dr. Price, I'm familiar with your previous work. Your book on economic mobility was required reading in my graduate program. Why haven't you returned to academia? Eleanor turned to see a young woman, perhaps 30, regarding her with respect. Thank you for reading my work. To answer your question, I plan to. Several universities have contacted me about positions based on my forthcoming book. But I've learned that the most valuable education happens outside ivory towers. These 3 years changed my perspective entirely. Senator Richardson stepped forward. Dr. Price, I'd actually like to discuss your thoughts on that wage protection bill further. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting? I'd be honored. Senator. Judge Morrison added, your perspective on wealth inequality would be valuable to some cases I'm reviewing. Would you be willing to serve as an expert consultant? Certainly, Judge. The tide had turned completely. The people who moments ago were laughing at the cleaning lady now competed for the attention of Dr. Eleanor Price, renowned economist and author. Constance and Melissa stood frozen, watching their social experiment backfire spectacularly. Eleanor turned to face them directly. Mrs. Ashford, I want to thank you for this invitation. It's provided the perfect final chapter for my book, a real-time demonstration of how quickly perception shifts when people realize someone they've dismissed might have value after all. You used us, Constance said bitterly. No, Eleanor corrected gently. I observed. I documented. I analyzed. That's what scholars do, and in the process, I learned something important, that dignity doesn't come from what you do for a living. It comes from how you treat people, regardless of what they do for a living. She looked around at the assembled guests. Every person in this room tonight will go home and be served by someone: a driver, a housekeeper, a server at a restaurant. My question is, will you see them as human beings with full, complex lives? Or will you see them as furniture that happens to move? The question hung in the air, challenging, uncomfortable, necessary. A woman Eleanor recognized as a prominent philanthropist stepped forward. "Dr. Price, I'd like to purchase 50 copies of your book when it's released, to distribute to our foundation's board members. I think we need to read it." Others chimed in with similar requests. Within minutes, Eleanor had commitments for over 300 books and invitations to speak at 4 different organizations. Constance's charity gala had become Eleanor's book launch party. As the evening wound down, Eleanor prepared to leave. She'd accomplished what she came to do, not to humiliate anyone, but to demonstrate a truth they needed to learn. Melissa approached her hesitantly. "Dr. Price, I'm sorry for how we treated you." Eleanor studied the young woman. She saw genuine embarrassment there, the first crack in entitled armor. "Melissa, you're young. You've been raised in a bubble that taught you your worth comes from your family's money. But real worth, real value comes from how you treat people when they can't offer you anything in return. You can learn that now, or you can spend decades being the person who values people only for what they can do for you. Choose wisely." As Eleanor walked down the marble steps to her waiting taxi, she heard footsteps behind her. "Dr. Price, wait." It was Senator Richardson, slightly out of breath. "I'm serious about that consultation. Your work on economic mobility could inform several bills I'm developing." Eleanor smiled. "Senator, I'll make time. Send your scheduler my contact information." In the taxi driving away, Eleanor looked back at the Ashford estate, lit up against the night sky. She'd cleaned those windows, scrubbed those floors, polished those fixtures. Honest work that had taught her more than a decade in academia. She wasn't angry at Constance and Melissa. If anything, she pitied them. They tried to humiliate someone they saw as beneath them, only to discover that beneath and above are illusions we create to make ourselves comfortable with inequality. Eleanor's phone buzzed. Her publisher: "Just got word that your appearance tonight is trending on social media. Pre-orders for the book up 300%. Whatever you did, it worked." Eleanor smiled. She hadn't gone to the gala for publicity. She'd gone to demonstrate a principle. But if that principle happened to help her book reach more people, help her message spread further, well, that was justice of a different kind. The taxi driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Rough night, miss?" "Actually," Eleanor replied, "it was rather perfect." Because Eleanor had learned something in 3 years of cleaning houses that all her years in academia hadn't fully taught her. That every person carries hidden depths, complex stories, and inherent worth that has nothing to do with their job title or bank balance. And sometimes, the best way to teach that lesson is to let people underestimate you, then rise to show them exactly how wrong they were. The real education was just beginning. Not for Eleanor, but for everyone who'd assumed they knew who she was based on what she did. Tomorrow, she'd start her new position as visiting professor at NYU. Next month, her book would release. And Constance Ashford's attempted humiliation would become a footnote in a much larger story about dignity, worth, and the danger of judging people by their circumstances rather than their character. Eleanor Price had cleaned her last floor. Not because cleaning was beneath her, but because she'd learned everything that experience had to teach. Now it was time for the next chapter, one where she'd use her platform to advocate for all the people who clean floors, serve food, drive cars, and do the invisible work that keeps society functioning. They deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with the dignity every human being deserves. And Eleanor was going to spend the rest of her career making sure that message reached everyone who needed to hear it. The morning after the gala, Eleanor's phone began ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from the New York Times, requesting an interview. The second was from NPR. By noon, she'd received 37 media requests. The video had gone viral overnight. Someone at the gala had live-streamed Eleanor's exchange with Constance, and it had been shared millions of times across social media platforms. The hashtags number Dr. Eleanor Price and number Know Your Worth were trending nationally. Eleanor sat in her small apartment, coffee in hand, reading through the messages. Some were supportive, others were critical, accusing her of deception or using the Ashfords unfairly. But the overwhelming response was positive, particularly from service workers who shared their own stories of being invisible, undervalued, dismissed. A message from her publisher: "We're moving up the release date. The publicity is extraordinary. Can you have final edits done by next week?" Eleanor smiled. She'd been ready for months. The book was her masterwork, 3 years of observation distilled into a comprehensive analysis of wealth, class, and the invisible barriers that keep people trapped in cycles of poverty despite working harder than many wealthy people ever would. But the book was only part of her plan. At 10 a.m., she had a video call with Senator Richardson. He appeared on her screen, his office visible behind him, shelves lined with law books, framed photographs with various dignitaries. "Dr. Price, thank you for making time. I've been reviewing your previous work on wage protection, and I'd like your input on the implementation timeline we discussed." For the next hour, they delved into policy details. Eleanor provided specific recommendations based on her research, including data from her 3 years working minimum wage jobs. She knew exactly how wage changes would impact real families because she'd lived it. "This is invaluable," the senator said. "I'd like to bring you to Washington to testify before our committee. Your unique perspective, both academic and lived experience, would be powerful." "I'd be honored, Senator. On one condition." He raised his eyebrows. "What's that?" "I'd like to bring 3 other witnesses with me. People currently working service jobs who can speak to the real-world impact of these policies. Their voices matter more than mine." The senator smiled. "Absolutely. In fact, that strengthens the testimony significantly." "Set it up." After the call, Eleanor reached out to 3 women she'd met while working: Maria, who cleaned office buildings; Jasmine, who worked as a home health aide; and Chen, who waited tables at 3 different restaurants to support her children. All 3 were brilliant, hardworking women trapped in cycles of low wages and no benefits. "Are you serious?" Maria asked when Eleanor called. "You want me to testify before Congress?" "I want the people making decisions about wages to hear from someone actually living on those wages," Eleanor replied. "You know the reality better than any politician or economist. Will you do it?" "Yes. Absolutely yes." Similar calls to Jasmine and Chen yielded the same response. These women had stories to tell, and Eleanor was going to make sure someone listened. Meanwhile, the situation at the Ashford estate had deteriorated rapidly. Constance Ashford's social media was flooded with criticism. People who'd once admired her charity work now questioned her motives. Event planners were canceling contracts. Her daughter's upcoming wedding was losing vendors who didn't want to be associated with the family. The Ashford Charitable Foundation was facing scrutiny too. Journalists were digging into their financials, discovering that administration costs consumed 70% of donations, meaning only 30 cents of every dollar actually went to charitable causes. The foundation primarily employed Ashford family members at exorbitant salaries. It was the exact pattern Eleanor had identified in her research: performative charity that benefits the wealthy more than it helps those in need. Constance called an emergency meeting with her PR team. The video of her humiliating Eleanor had been viewed 15 million times. Her reputation was in free fall. "We need to control this narrative," her publicist said. "Issue an apology. Make a generous donation to a workers' rights organization. Do an interview explaining you've learned from this." But Constance wasn't interested in learning. She was interested in revenge. "That woman deceived us," she told her lawyer. "She worked in our home under false pretenses. There has to be legal action we can take." Her lawyer shook his head. "Mrs. Ashford, she did nothing illegal. She was hired to clean, and she cleaned. If she was also conducting research during that time, that's protected under academic freedom." you'd have no case. What about invasion of privacy? She observed our private lives. You invited her into your home. There's no reasonable expectation of privacy in that context. And she's assured me she's changed all identifying details in her book. Legally, she's bulletproof. Constance slumped in her chair, defeated. For the first time in her life, money and connections couldn't fix her problem. Melissa entered the room. Mother, the Wellington family just withdrew their sponsorship of the foundation. That's $500,000 in annual funding. This is all her fault, Constance said bitterly. No, a voice said from the doorway. It was Constance's husband, Robert, who'd been largely absent during the gala. It's our fault. We treated people terribly, and we got caught. Eleanor Price didn't create this situation. She just exposed it. Robert. No, Constance. I'm ashamed. I've watched you treat staff with contempt for years. I've participated in it. We raised our daughter to think she's better than other people simply because she was born wealthy. That video didn't show the world something false. It showed them exactly who we are. He walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds. I've been reading about Dr. Price's background. Did you know her husband died after a long illness? She nursed him through it, exhausted her savings, paying medical bills, and then lost her job due to false accusations she couldn't afford to fight. She could have been bitter. Instead, she survived. She worked. She studied. She turned suffering into scholarship. Constance said nothing. We have a choice, Robert continued. We can fight this and look even worse. Or we can actually learn something and change. Change how? Melissa asked quietly. Starting with honest reflection on how we've treated people, following with real changes to how we run the foundation, and maybe, just maybe, apologizing sincerely, instead of just managing our image. That evening, Eleanor received an unexpected email from Robert Ashford requesting a private meeting. She agreed, curious about his intentions. They met at a quiet cafe, neutral territory. Robert arrived alone, looking tired and genuinely contrite. Dr. Price, thank you for meeting me. I want to apologize for my family's behavior and my own complicity in it. Eleanor studied him. Go on. I've read your previous work. Your book on economic mobility should be required reading for anyone with wealth. It certainly humbled me. I realized I've spent years believing my success was entirely due to my own merit, ignoring the advantages I was born with. That's a common blindness among the wealthy, Eleanor said, not unkindly. Acknowledging privilege feels like diminishing accomplishment. Exactly. But you've shown me that's false logic. Acknowledging advantage doesn't erase achievement. It just provides context. He paused. I want to make real changes to our foundation. I'd like your consultation on how to restructure it to actually serve people rather than serving our tax purposes and social image. Eleanor was surprised. It's overdue. I'm also prepared to endow a scholarship fund in your name at Columbia to support students from working-class backgrounds pursuing graduate studies in economics. $1 million annually. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. That's generous. But why? Because you're right about everything you've said. And because I have resources that could actually help people instead of just maintaining my family status. I want to do better. Will you help me? Eleanor considered. She could refuse, maintain her moral high ground, continue to use the Ashfords as a cautionary tale, or she could accept that real change, even imperfect, slow change, was worth supporting. I'll help, she said finally. On several conditions. First, the foundation restructure must be genuine and transparent. Second, you commit to paying all your employees a true living wage. Not minimum wage, but enough to actually live with dignity. Third, you use your platform to advocate publicly for workers' rights. Agreed. All of it. And one more thing, Eleanor added. I want you to work 1 week doing the jobs your staff does. clean houses, serve food, experience what that labor actually entails. Robert blinked. That's uncomfortable? Yes. But necessary. For genuine understanding. You can't truly value labor you've never performed. He nodded slowly. Over the following weeks, Eleanor watched Robert Ashford transform. He worked alongside the housekeeping staff, the kitchen staff, the groundskeepers. He came home exhausted, with new respect for the physical demands of service work. He shared his experience on social media, admitting his previous ignorance and advocating for better treatment of service workers. The posts went viral, not for mockery this time, but for genuine reflection. Constance and Melissa were slower to change. Constance issued a formal apology that felt scripted and defensive. Melissa remained largely silent, processing her public embarrassment. But Robert's transformation was real. He restructured the foundation completely, reducing administrative overhead to 15% and increasing direct charitable giving. He established oversight boards with actual community members, not just wealthy socialites. He committed to transparency in all foundation activities. And he funded Eleanor's scholarship program at Columbia, ensuring that 50 students annually would receive full funding to pursue graduate economics degrees, regardless of their background. Eleanor's book release became a major cultural event. She appeared on major news programs, gave talks at universities, and testified before Congress with Maria, Jasmine, and Chen. Their testimony was powerful. 3 women with direct experience of poverty wages, speaking truth to power about the real-world impact of policy decisions. Senators, Maria said, her voice strong despite her nervousness. I work 50 hours a week cleaning offices. I take the bus 2 hours each way because I can't afford to live near my workplace. I have a college degree, but I got sick and lost my job, and now I can't break back into professional work. I'm not lazy. I'm not looking for handouts. I just want my labor to be valued enough that I can pay rent and buy groceries without choosing between them. The room was silent, senators actually listening instead of performing for cameras. Jasmine spoke about caring for elderly and disabled clients. Work that required skill, compassion, and emotional labor, all for wages barely above minimum. Chen described working 3 jobs to support her children while trying to pursue online education to improve her prospects. Their testimony, combined with Eleanor's research and policy recommendations, led to significant legislation. Not perfect, not everything Eleanor wanted, but real progress on wage protection, benefits access, and worker protections. 6 months after the gala, Eleanor stood in a Columbia University classroom, preparing for her first lecture as restored faculty. The department had formally apologized for the previous accusations. The vindictive department head had been removed, and Eleanor was back where she belonged, but changed by her journey. Welcome to Economics 401. Wealth, Poverty, and Power, she began. This course will challenge everything you think you know about economic mobility, meritocracy, and class in America. And it starts with a simple exercise. Each of you will spend 1 week working a minimum wage job and documenting your experience. Groans from the privileged students who expected purely theoretical study. If you think that's beneath you, Eleanor continued, then you've just identified your own bias. The assumption that certain work is degrading, rather than recognizing all labor has dignity and value. The question isn't whether work is beneath you. It's whether your treatment of people doing that work is beneath your values. The students fell silent, absorbing the challenge. Eleanor smiled. Over the next semester, you're going to learn economics not just from textbooks, but from lived experience. You're going to understand that the numbers we study represent real people with real struggles. And hopefully, you'll leave this class committed to using your education to create a more equitable world rather than just enriching yourselves. This was her mission now, not just to study inequality, but to train the next generation to dismantle it. Meanwhile, Constance Ashford sat in her mansion, the same one Eleanor had once cleaned, reading Eleanor's book. Slowly, painfully, she was beginning to understand what Eleanor had been trying to teach her. There was a chapter about a wealthy woman who fired staff for minor infractions while spending thousands on a single handbag. Constance recognized herself in the description, though Eleanor had changed enough details to protect her privacy. The subject exhibited a common pattern among the wealthy: empathy reserved for their peer group, with those providing services treated as interchangeable and disposable. This reflects not individual cruelty, but systemic dehumanization when certain people are viewed as tools rather than full human beings. Constance closed the book, tears in her eyes. She'd spent her life believing her worth came from her wealth, her status, her position in society. Eleanor had shown her that real worth came from character, from how you treat people who can offer you nothing in return. She picked up her phone and called Robert. "I want to work the service jobs too. Like you did. Constance, I need to understand, really understand. Will you arrange it?" Robert's voice was warm. "Yes, I'll arrange it." Change was slow, uncomfortable, and incomplete. But it was happening. Eleanor had set out simply to survive after devastating losses. She'd ended up teaching the most important lesson of her career, not in a classroom, but in the real world where theory met lived experience. And the ripples continued to spread. Service workers across the country were sharing their stories, demanding better treatment and wages. Employers were being held accountable. Policy was changing. One person's dignity, defended and demonstrated, had sparked a movement. That night, Eleanor received a message from an unknown number. "Dr. Price, I'm a housekeeper in Chicago. Your book gave me courage to report wage theft by my employer. We just won our case. Thank you for showing us we matter." Eleanor read the message 3 times, tears flowing freely. This was why she'd endured the humiliation, the hardship, the years of uncertainty. Not for revenge, but for this real people finding their voices, claiming their dignity, changing their circumstances. The Ashford Gala had been Constance's attempt to humiliate someone she saw as beneath her. Instead, it became the catalyst for a transformation that reached far beyond one family, one woman, one viral video. It became proof that dignity cannot be taken, only given away. And Eleanor had never given hers away. She'd held on to it through poverty, through loss, through being treated as invisible. And when the moment came to reveal who she truly was, that dignity shone so brightly it illuminated everyone around her, showing them not who they thought she was, but who they had become. 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Eleanor stood before a packed auditorium at the United Nations. She'd been invited to present her research on global wealth inequality and worker protections. The audience included economists, policymakers, and representatives from 150 countries. But Eleanor didn't begin with statistics. "A year ago," she started, "I was cleaning toilets for a living. Today, I'm addressing the United Nations. This dramatic change in my circumstances doesn't reflect a change in my value as a human being. It reflects a change in how I'm perceived based on my position. And that's exactly the problem we're here to address." The audience leaned forward, engaged. I didn't become more intelligent, more worthy, or more deserving between then and now. I was the same person scrubbing floors that I am standing before you today. The only difference is visibility. As a cleaning lady, I was invisible. As Dr. Eleanor Price, I'm seen. But the 67 million domestic workers worldwide deserve to be seen regardless of their job titles. She pulled up her first slide photographs of Maria, Jasmine, Chen, and dozens of other workers she'd met. These are some of the world's essential workers. They clean our homes, care for our children and elderly, prepare our food, and maintain the infrastructure of daily life. Their labor enables everyone else's productivity. Yet they're systematically undervalued, underpaid, and treated as disposable. For 90 minutes, Eleanor presented comprehensive data on wage disparities, the economic impact of fair labor practices, and policy recommendations that could transform millions of lives. Her research was rigorous, her arguments compelling, and her passion evident. The presentation received a standing ovation. Afterward, representatives from 15 countries approached her about implementing similar policies. The European Union invited her to consult on their workers' rights legislation. The World Bank requested her research for their poverty reduction strategies. Eleanor's work was changing the global conversation about labor and dignity. But her proudest moment came 3 months later, when the first recipients of the Ashford Prize Scholarship gathered at Columbia for an orientation. 50 students from working-class backgrounds, many of whom had worked service jobs to survive, now had full funding to pursue graduate degrees in economics. The scholarship covered tuition, living expenses, books, and provided mentorship support. Eleanor looked at their faces diverse in ethnicity, background, and experience, but united by determination and potential that had been systematically overlooked. "You are here," she told them, "not as charity cases, but as scholars who bring invaluable perspective to economic study. Your lived experience of financial struggle is not a deficit, it's expertise that traditional economics desperately needs. Don't hide your backgrounds, own them. Let them inform your research and fuel your commitment to creating a more equitable world." A young woman raised her hand. "Dr. Price, I worked as a housekeeper to put myself through undergrad. My professors treated me differently when they found out, like I didn't belong in academic spaces. How do we handle that prejudice?" Eleanor smiled. "You handle it by refusing to internalize it. Their prejudice reveals their limitations, not yours, and you have the power to change those spaces simply by existing in them, succeeding in them, and eventually leading them. Every person in this room is a revolutionary. Simply by claiming space you've been told you don't deserve." The students erupted in applause. Among them was Sophia, daughter of immigrants, who'd cleaned houses alongside her mother while studying physics. "Dr. Price, my mother still cleans houses. She's so proud I'm here, but I feel guilty that I'm advancing while she's still struggling." "Don't feel guilty," Eleanor said firmly. "Honor her by using your education to fight for people like her. The best way to thank our parents for their sacrifices is to help ensure other people's children don't have to make the same ones." The scholarship program became a model for other universities. Within 2 years, 12 schools had launched similar initiatives, collectively supporting over 600 students annually. Meanwhile, the Ashford family's transformation continued. Constance had completed her service work experience. 1 month, working alongside the staff she'd once treated with contempt. It changed her fundamentally. "I was exhausted after 1 week," she admitted in an interview Eleanor conducted for a follow-up article. "These women work these jobs for years, decades, while also managing households, raising children, caring for family members. I had no idea. I thought I understood struggle because I managed a busy social calendar. I was so ignorant." Melissa, initially resistant to change, had returned from college with a new perspective. She'd taken Eleanor's course on wealth and poverty, which forced her to confront her privilege. "Professor Price didn't let us hide behind theory," Melissa said. "She made us work minimum wage jobs, create budgets based on those wages, and try to survive for a month. I failed. I couldn't make the numbers work. And she told me, 'You fail this exercise with no consequences. Millions of people fail it in real life and lose everything.' That broke something open in me." Melissa had changed her major to social work and now volunteered at a homeless shelter, working with families experiencing housing insecurity. Robert Ashford's foundation had become a model for effective philanthropy. They'd shifted from high-profile galas to direct community investment. Instead of one annual fundraiser, they created sustainable programs. Job training, microloans for small businesses, subsidized childcare for working parents. The foundation's operating costs dropped to 12%, meaning 88 cents of every donated dollar reached people in need. Their impact metrics showed measurable improvement in community outcomes. Robert appeared with Eleanor at a philanthropy conference, presenting their model. "I spent years treating charity as a way to feel good about my wealth," He admitted to the audience, "Dr. Price taught me that real charity isn't about making wealthy people feel virtuous. It's about addressing systemic inequities and empowering people to change their own circumstances." The conference led to similar transformations at dozens of other foundations. But perhaps the most profound change happened in spaces Eleanor never directly touched. Service workers worldwide began organizing, inspired by Eleanor's visibility and advocacy. They formed unions, demanded better wages, and fought for recognition of their labor's value. The #number service work is dignified work trended globally. Workers shared stories of mistreatment alongside stories of employers who treated them with respect. The public conversation shifted. Companies that treated workers poorly faced boycotts and public pressure. Companies that paid living wages and provided benefits received recognition and increased business. The economic argument for fair labor practices became clear. Happy, fairly compensated workers were more productive, stayed longer in jobs, and provided better service. Treating people well wasn't just moral, it was profitable. Eleanor received hundreds of messages weekly from workers who'd found courage to demand better treatment, negotiate for higher wages, or leave exploitative situations. One message stood out. "Dr. Price, I'm the woman who replaced you at the Ashford estate. Mrs. Ashford treats me with respect now, pays me well, and actually asks about my family. You changed her. Thank you for changing my life without even knowing I exist." Eleanor read that message 3 times, overwhelmed by the ripple effects of standing firm in her own dignity. 5 years after the gala, Eleanor published her second book, The Price of Invisibility: How Service Work Shapes Modern Society. It became required reading in sociology, economics, and business programs worldwide. The book traced how service workers, despite being essential, were systematically rendered invisible by social and economic structures designed to maintain class hierarchies. But it also documented the growing movement to change those structures. Eleanor was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and corporate leadership trainings. She consulted with governments on labor policy, advised businesses on fair compensation structures, and trained the next generation of economists to center human dignity in their analyses. Yet she never forgot where the journey began in grief, loss, and the desperate scramble to survive. On the 5th anniversary of her husband's death, Eleanor visited his grave. She brought flowers and sat beside the headstone, updating him on everything that had happened. "I wish you could see this, James," she said softly. "You always believed our struggles had meaning beyond the suffering. You were right. Your illness bankrupted us financially, but it taught me about the healthcare system's cruelty toward the poor. Losing you broke my heart, but it also broke open my understanding of what matters. You'd be proud of what I've built from the ruins." A young woman approached hesitantly. "Dr. Price? I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Jennifer Chen's daughter. My mom said if I ever saw you, I should say thank you, because of your advocacy. She now works 1 job instead of 3. She's taking nursing classes. She has health insurance. You changed our lives." Eleanor stood, embracing the young woman. "Your mother changed mine. Her courage to share her story helped change policy for millions. Please tell her I said that." After Jennifer left, Eleanor sat quietly, reflecting on the interconnected web of impact. Chen's story had moved senators. Their policy changes had helped Jennifer's family. Jennifer would grow up seeing her mother valued and might carry that forward. One person's dignity, defended, could lift countless others. That evening, Eleanor attended a reunion dinner with Maria, Jasmine, Chen, and a dozen other women she'd met while working minimum wage jobs. They gathered monthly, supporting each other's continued growth. Maria had completed her degree and now worked as a social worker. Jasmine had started a home healthcare cooperative that paid workers fairly and provided benefits. Chen was in nursing school, as Jennifer had mentioned. "I think about where we were 5 years ago," Maria said, raising her glass. "Struggling, invisible, exhausted. And I think about where we are now. Still working hard, but with dignity, opportunity, and hope." They toasted to survival, to dignity, to the power of refusing to accept dehumanization. Later, Eleanor returned to her apartment, no longer the cramped space above a bookstore, but a comfortable home she'd purchased with book royalties. She could have bought something luxurious, but she'd chosen a modest place in a working-class neighborhood, staying connected to the community that had sustained her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Constance Ashford. Eleanor, the foundation is hosting a gala for the scholarship recipients. We'd be honored if you'd speak. No tricks this time. Just genuine gratitude. Eleanor smiled. Constance had come far from the woman who'd invited her to a gala as a cruel joke. The relationship would never be warm, too much had happened, but it had evolved into mutual respect. She replied, "I'll be there. Thank you for continuing to do the work." The following Saturday, Eleanor returned to the Ashford estate for the first time in years. The ballroom looked the same: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, elegant decorations. But the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of socialites competing in designer gowns, the room held a mix of scholarship recipients, community leaders, former service workers, now in professional positions, and advocates for workers' rights. Robert Ashford greeted her warmly. "Dr. Price, thank you for coming. I wanted you to see what you've helped create." He gestured around the room. "Every person here has been impacted by your work, either directly through the scholarship program or indirectly through policy changes your advocacy achieved. This is what transformation looks like." Constance approached, more subdued than Eleanor remembered. "Eleanor, I want you to know I've read your books. Multiple times. I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. I'm sorry it took public humiliation for me to learn basic human decency." Eleanor studied her. "Constance, the fact that you learned it all is what matters. Many people in your position never do." Melissa joined them, wearing a simple dress instead of designer fashion. "Dr. Price, I'm presenting my MSW thesis next month on economic barriers to homeless services. Would you be willing to attend? Your feedback would mean a lot." "I'd be honored, Melissa." As Eleanor mingled with the guests, she overheard conversations that warmed her heart. The living wage policy passed in our city thanks to Dr. Price's testimony. Our company restructured compensation based on her research. Employee retention up 60%. I'm the first in my family to attend graduate school. The Ashford Price Scholarship made it possible. Eleanor was introduced to a young man named Marcus, a scholarship recipient studying economics. "Dr. Price, I grew up in foster care. I aged out of the system at 18 with nothing. I worked 3 jobs just to survive. I never thought I'd go to college, let alone graduate school. This scholarship saved my life." "Marcus, you saved your own life through your determination. The scholarship just removed some barriers. What are you planning to research?" "The economic impact of foster care system reform. I want to help kids aging out have better support than I did." Eleanor felt tears welling up. "That's exactly the kind of research we need. Promise me you'll send me your first draft." "I'd love to help however I can." When Eleanor was called to speak, she walked to the podium overlooking the same ballroom where she'd once been mocked. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "5 years ago," she began, "I stood in this room as an object of ridicule. Tonight, I stand here surrounded by proof that change is possible in individuals, in institutions, and in society." She looked directly at the scholarship recipients. "You represent something revolutionary. The idea that talent and potential exist everywhere, but opportunity does not. You're here because someone finally created a pathway that recognized your worth regardless of your background. But don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the struggles that brought you here. Let them fuel your commitment to creating more pathways for those still climbing. The greatest honor you can give this scholarship is to use your education to lift others." She turned to Robert and Constance. "And to the Ashford family, thank you for having the courage to truly change. It's harder to transform ourselves than to write a check. You did the harder work." Finally, she addressed everyone. This room used to represent exclusion. Tonight, it represents inclusion. Used to represent hierarchy. Tonight, it represents human dignity. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because people chose to see their own biases, confront them, and change. That choice is available to everyone, every day. The applause was thunderous. After her speech, a distinguished older woman approached. "Dr. Price, I'm Catherine Winters, Dean of Harvard's Kennedy School. We'd like to offer you a named professorship, the Winters Chair in Economic Justice. Full academic freedom to continue your research and advocacy." Eleanor was stunned. "Dean Winters, I'm honored, but I have commitments at Columbia. We'll work around them. This position would give you a broader platform to influence policy at the highest levels. Think about it." That night, driving home, Eleanor reflected on the journey. From grief and loss to this opportunities she'd never imagined. Impact beyond her dreams and the satisfaction of knowing her work mattered. But she also thought about the millions still struggling, the cleaning ladies, home health aides, food service workers, and countless others whose labor remained undervalued. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. Inequality was a hydra. You cut off one head and two more appeared. But Eleanor had learned that sustainable change didn't come from defeating the hydra once. It came from teaching people to see it, name it, and commit to fighting it every day in small and large ways. She'd started this journey as a grieving widow, desperate to survive. She'd become an advocate, a scholar, and a catalyst for transformation. But most importantly, she'd remained herself. Dr. Eleanor Price, who believed that every person deserved dignity, respect, and the opportunity to thrive. That belief, defended and demonstrated through years of hardship, had changed the world in ways large and small. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and continue the work. Because justice wasn't a destination, it was a daily practice of seeing people, valuing them, and fighting for systems that honored their humanity. The cleaning lady had become a professor again. But she'd never forget what it meant to be invisible, and she'd spend the rest of her career making sure others wouldn't have to endure that invisibility to be valued. That was her true calling, not the titles, the books, or the accolades. Simply the commitment to remind the world, every day, that every human being, regardless of what they do for a living, deserves to be seen, valued, and treated with dignity. And she'd keep teaching that lesson for as long as it took for everyone to learn it. The end,